Hare Krishna. We have with us today a very eloquent and scholastic speaker from ISKCON India. His name is Chaitanya Charan Prabhu. Chaitanya Charan Prabhu is an engineer and a prolific writer. He is an editor of the Back to Godhead magazine of ISKCON. And he has his own website called the www.thespiritualscientist.com. I want to make this introduction a very brief one because we're running short of time. But the best way to understand Prabhupada's books, especially the Bhagavad Gita, where there's a lot of depth in what Prabhupada has written, for us people in Kali Yuga, it's very difficult to understand the depth of Prabhupada's books. If we want to understand and appreciate Prabhupada's writings, it is very important to read and listen to Prabhu's lectures and articles. Because these lectures and articles have a AAA effect. They are analyzed very beautifully. There's a lot of analogies by which we understand the concepts. And there's a lot of acronyms by which we can remember the concepts. So all 3 A's are there in Prabhu's writing. So with that small introduction, I just want to welcome His Grace Chaitanya Charan Prabhu today for the program. Thank you.
Om Ajnanatimirandhasya. Kindly repeat. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Anjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Gurave Namaha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami iti namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Together Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So, welcome all of you to today evening Sunday program. Today we'll be discussing on the topic of how the Bhagavad Gita is a manual for living. In the Bhagavad Gita itself, in the 16th chapter, 24th verse, it is stated, Tasmat Shastram Pramanante Karya Vyavasthitau Gyatva Shastra Vidhanoktam Karma Kartum Iharhasi. Tasmad Shastram Pramanante. Therefore, by knowing from Shastra, Karya Vyavasthitau, know properly what is Karya, what is to be done, Akarya, what is not to be done. And Gyatva Shastra Vidhanoktam, and knowing in this way the Vidhan, the statement of Shastra, karma kartum iharhasi. It behooves you, Arjuna, to act accordingly. So Krishna here is telling that we should act according to Shastra. Now the word Shastra essentially means that which disciplines. Shastra is from Sanskrit related with Shishya and Shasana. That which regulates, that which disciplines. So, the purpose of scripture is to guide us in life. And I will discuss in this talk 3 main points. Firstly, what are the normal sources from which we seek guidance? Secondly, why we can or we should turn towards scripture for guidance, and lastly, how we can discern whether scriptural guidance is actually benefiting us. So firstly, we all of us turn towards someone, something or the other to shape ourselves in our lives. There are some teachers who say, there's no need to follow any guru. There is no need to follow anyone. Now, at one level, it sounds very attractive. No need to follow anyone. But if we follow that, then we are following the person who is saying, don't follow anyone. Isn't it? So, in that sense, every absolute statement like this, every statement of absolute rejection contains within it its own rejection. So, we cannot avoid following someone or the other. Broadly speaking, what we follow falls in 4 general categories: tradition, culture, mood, and logic. Tradition, that means, why am I doing this? Because we have always done it. Because my parents did like this, my grandparents did like this, their great-great-grandparents did like this. So this is what we always have done, and that's why we will do it. So tradition is one way in which people decide what to do and what not to do. And in some ways, tradition can be reliable, because in every tradition, there are nuggets of wisdom that are available. Even in the Vedic tradition, the learning from tradition itself is called the praman. It is called aitihya. Itihas is history. Aitihya is learning from the historical record. So, for example, whether you look at Chinese wisdom or Australian wisdom or Italian wisdom or Indian wisdom, there are some stories about how a greedy person suffers, a proud person suffers, a person who does not control one's senses gets into trouble. So there are basic morals in various traditions, and we can learn from them. But often, tradition alone is not always reliable, because quite often, certain things get initiated by some people and others start following them. And then they may well become superstitions. That means just because our ancestors have done it, and why we are doing it, no one thinks about it. What is the reason to do it? No, just we have done it, we always keep doing it. And especially in modern times, or in nowadays as it is, postmodern times, so tradition is often strongly criticized. Why should you follow somebody in the past? The past is gone now. Now we are in current times. There's no need to follow the past. So, tradition is often criticized as being old-fashioned, obsolete, regressive, or whatever. But tradition alone is not necessarily a reliable barometer. Just because everyone has done something doesn't necessarily mean that that thing is right. So second reference that we use for making our decisions is culture. Culture means everyone does it. So why do I wear a particular kind of dress? Because everyone wears it. That's fashion. So sometimes, say a particular kind of shoe becomes fashionable. Then everybody starts wearing that kind of shoe. After some time, it's not that people's legs change, but just because of some propaganda, some fashions change, and then everybody starts wearing a different kind of shoe. So fashions are one way in which the culture keeps changing its form. But again, just because, so tradition means we have always done it. That refers to the past. Culture refers to the present. We are always, everyone is doing it, so I'll do it. To some extent, it is not that we have to necessarily go against everything in the culture. But it is also not that we have to go along with everything in the culture. Because often, as I said, the culture is driven by things which are not always very sensible. So, especially in today's age, where there is often quite a lot of materialistic propaganda by various vested interests who are out to exploit people through advertisements, through propaganda of materialism, then culture is often shaped by people who want to exploit others. If you look at the roughly 1920, 1930s, just before the Great Depression hit America, at that time, the cigarette companies, they found that their market had reached a saturation point. Because all the people who could smoke, all the young people who had the young or middle-aged people who had the financial power to smoke, they had become smokers. And then they found that, our market has reached a saturation. So what to do? So then they got a brainwave. They said that 50% of the market is untapped because women don't smoke. So if we can somehow get women to smoke, then our market will expand enormously. But in that particular culture, men smoking was accepted. Not only accepted, it was cool. At that time, the harmful effects of smoking had not yet become public knowledge. So then, in one of the American Independence Day parades, the cigarette companies got some of the most popular female icons, stars and Hollywood stars and others. They all got them in the most photogenic position in the parade. They got all of them to flip out a specially made thin cigarette customized for females and light it dramatically and start smoking it. And literally hundreds of women, they had all been paid over there to smoke the cigarettes. And when they were asked, what are you doing? They said, we are lighting the torch of freedom. The torch of freedom. Now, because that was the time when the suffragette movement for women was gaining momentum, and the call for freedom was so mesmerizing, so captivating, that it just caught the public imagination. And within less than a decade, literally millions of women started smoking. And in the frenzy, created by the idea of freedom, nobody asked how lighting a cigarette will lead to freedom of any kind. So what happened is, it's just propaganda. So the culture can often mislead us in ways that we may not even realize because the passion of the moment goes in that direction. So culture alone, again, is not a reliable way in which we can learn things. We can make reliable decisions. The third is mood. Mood means I feel like doing it. Why did you do like that? I felt like doing it. Now, certainly, our feelings are important. But at the same time, our feelings, we cannot make them all important. Because often, there are things which are important, which we may not feel like doing. And, every parent knows that even if the child doesn't feel like studying, you have to push the child to study. Otherwise, child's career will never have any bright prospects. So to a large extent, children are more mind than intelligence. Their mind is very active. Intelligence is not yet developed. So people who rely only on feelings or largely on feelings in making their decisions, they may be biologically adults, but they're psychologically still children. Because they're just relying on their feelings. This feels good, I'll do it. This doesn't feel good, I won't do it. Just give it up. So, our moods are fickle. And if we rely on our moods alone, we may give up important things just because we don't feel like doing them. And the nature of the mind is that the mind works both ways. That means the mind will give us a mood. Hey, this is so boring. This is so tiresome, such trouble. Why should you do this? Just forget it. And then, when we neglect something which is important to be done, and after that the consequences start coming in, and we start getting into trouble because of that, then the same mind will beat us. What kind of fool are you? Why did you give it up as such a trivial reason? You should be responsible. So the same mind beats us one way, and then it beats us the other way also. So if we rely only on our moods, we will just be tossed about like a small leaf in an ocean. Going here, going there, and ultimately ending up nowhere. The mind, what it does is, it trips us and it traps us. If you are going in a right direction, it trips us. It makes us fall down. And then it gets us caught in something petty, something trivial, and it traps us over there. So our moods alone are also not reliable. Now again, I'm not saying any of these sources are references for decision making are to be entirely neglected. But we cannot make them the sole authority. And lastly is logic. Logic means we use our intelligence. Hey, this person, whatever he says, whatever he or she speaks, it makes sense. It's logical. So I think I'll do it. Now, among these, relatively speaking, logic is more reliable than others. But at the same time, logic also has its limitations. Because our logical capacity itself is limited, and our logical capacity is also based on the information that we have. And if our information is incomplete, then whatever logical conclusion we might have arrived at, it might turn out to be wrong. For example, suppose a person is, say, having some heart palpitations, and the person comes to a doctor, and the doctor says, take this medicine, this medicine, this medicine. I know that's a normal standard medicine for treating heart palpitations. And it would be a logical treatment to give. But if, say, this is a hypothetical case, that medicine is contraindicated to diabetes. Now it has some serious side effects if a diabetic patient takes it. And the doctor doesn't know that the patient has diabetes. Then although at that time, earlier, that knowledge was logical. That particular decision to give that particular medicine was logical. But when more information comes up, logic will not make, that same thing will seem illogical. So, the problem with logic is that our logical capacity is incomplete, and the information on which we base our logical capacity, that is also incomplete. So now all these four are valuable sources of acquiring knowledge and making decisions. But they are not reliable. They're useful. And we cannot neglect any of them, but we cannot rely on any of them either. So that brings us to a fifth source of knowledge. That is scripture. Now often we may have a particular notion of scripture. Some book that is considered holy by some tradition, that is called a scripture, and that was given some thousands of years ago. How is it relevant today? Why should I make it the manual for my living now? Is it really relevant? So, to address this question, firstly, we need to understand the principle of scripture, and then we can look at the form of scripture. So, principle of scripture is that if we look at the world around us, God has provided us the basic necessities for living. We need food, we need light, we need air, we need water. And all these are provided for in nature. So, if our basic necessities are provided for survival's sake, then will God not provide for another necessity? That is the knowledge for living. What is required for living is not just heat, light, air, water, food. We also need knowledge. What am I supposed to live for? So will God not provide that knowledge? Suppose, the more science has studied the world around us, the more science has studied our own human body. In fact, science has studied even the cells in our body. each of them is found to be very, very complex. And things are so complex. At that time, the question comes up, what is the purpose of all this complexity? Suppose somebody comes and gives you, say it's your birthday, and somebody comes and gives you a very complicated machine. Now you have never seen that machine, you have never heard that machine, you don't know what to do with that machine. And a person just gives the machine and goes away. Now we can see that it's a complex machine, it's a valuable machine. And now, if somebody is a good friend, an intelligent friend, will that person just give a valuable machine without giving any guidance of what we are supposed to do with it? How are we supposed to use it? So, our own body is a complex machine. Medical researchers have done surveys that say, we know that if somebody is unconscious and requires oxygen, it cannot breathe on its own, then at that time, to put a person on artificial respiration, that's expensive. It's life-saving, but it's expensive. So medical researchers invented that, how many of the bodily systems can we continue artificially? If a person can't breathe, we can put a respirator. If a person's heart doesn't function properly, we can have a pacemaker. If a person's kidneys don't function properly, we can use dialysis. So like that, how many of the body's functions can we artificially sustain? And how much would it cost if even theoretically it would be possible to sustain the whole body by artificial means? So specific estimates vary, but researchers say that the cost of running the whole body, first of all, internal systems like blood circulation and all those things, we don't even know how to continue them, practically speaking. We can keep the heart beating, but there are many systems which you cannot do. But a projected estimate is that to maintain all the body alive even for one day would take lakhs and lakhs of rupees. It's no small amount. And now the point is, if all this complicated machinery is given, if a system is there to maintain the system, maintain this body, what is its purpose? Would God not give some guidance, some input about what would be the knowledge, how are we supposed to live in life? So in principle, we can say that yes, God will give some knowledge. So now the next question comes up. If once we understand in principle, God will provide knowledge, then we can go to the specifics. So how do we know a particular book is like a manual for living? Say, is it that whichever tradition we belong to, that tradition's book, we consider it a manual for living? Not necessarily. It is, we have to look objectively. The Bhagavad Gita's approach in sharing its wisdom is not at all dogmatic. It is invitational. Bhagavad Gita dogmatic doesn't mean that it doesn't say this is the truth and you have to accept it. If you don't accept it, you're going to go to hell. No, not like that. The Bhagavad Gita's approach is invitational. This is what is being explained. Try it out. If it works for you, continue it. No. The Bhagavad Gita reveals a God who respects human will and appeals to human intelligence. What we see in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, after speaking the whole Bhagavad Gita, at the end he says, Vimrishyaitadasheshena yathechasi tatha akuru. Now deliberate deeply on this message and then decide what you want to do. Decide what you want to do. So Krishna is appealing to Arjuna's intelligence and asking him to take a decision. Prior to that also Krishna says that pratyakshaavagamam dharmyam susukham kartumam vyayam. Pratyakshaavagamam dharmyam. You can practically experience and verify by experience what I am telling you. So the Bhagavad Gita's approach is not dogmatic, it is invitational. So what does this mean? Certainly accepting, say, the Bhagavad Gita as a manual for living, as a guidebook coming from God, it requires faith. But faith in and of itself is not bad. There is reasonable faith and there is blind faith. For example, if a patient is sick and the patient goes to a doctor, and then the patient says to doctor says, okay, this is your disease and this is the medicine. The patient says, doctor, how can I have faith in you? First you cure me, then I'll take your medicine. The doctor will say, you got things wrong. You have to take the medicine and then you have to check whether you are cured or not. So normally when we go to a doctor and take medicine, what do? We have to put faith. In religious circles often it is said that to know God you have to take a leap of faith. Often when we go to a doctor, we have to take a gulp of faith. We have to take down the medicine into our body, but it's still faith. So now when we go to a doctor, we put faith, but that is not blind faith. It is reasonable faith. What is the characteristic of reasonable faith as contrasted with blind faith? Reasonable faith is sensible and verifiable. Sensible means, say suppose I got pain in my stomach is paining, and I go to a doctor, and a doctor says, we have to amputate your leg. What is it? The pain is the stomach, why do you want to amputate my leg? It doesn't make sense. So, even with our limited knowledge, we do try to make sense of what the doctor's diagnosis is. And the doctor's diagnosis makes sense. Okay, your stomach is upset, you have probably eaten some substance, so acidity has increased in your stomach. Take these antacids. Within 2 days, your pain will go away. So then, first we evaluate using our intelligence whether it makes sense. Then after that, we try it out. We take the medicine and we see whether it benefits us. And that is the verifiability of the message, of the doctor's prescription. And if we find that we are cured by it, then our faith strengthens. And this faith is not dogmatic. It is experiential. Sanatana Goswami, a great Vaishnava-acharya, he says that ultimately among all the pramanas, there is anubhav. Experience is the highest pramana. When we experience something, when we experience the positive benefit of Krishna consciousness, then that is the highest pramana. So, applying this two characteristics of reasonable faith, sensible and verifiable, to the Bhagavad Gita, what would it imply? When we come first to the Bhagavad Gita and start studying it, we study it with our intelligence to see if it makes sense. Make sense means two things. Whether the Bhagavad Gita itself makes sense and whether the Bhagavad Gita's guidelines for living help us to make sense of life. So for example, when we understand that I'm not the body, I'm the soul, does that really make sense? We evaluate that. And then, okay, if I'm to live spiritually, what does it mean? What will I have to do? Is this sort of life sensible? And then, if it makes sense, and now when Krishna says, Vimrishaita dasheshena yati chisatha, that deliberate and decide what you want to do. Therein, Krishna is appealing to Arjuna's intelligence. And he's pointing out that the faith I'm asking you to have is sensible. Use your intelligence to see if it makes sense or not. And then Krishna is also assuring when he says in 9.2, Pratyaksha-avagamam dharmyam, that you will practically experience it if you practice it. Here he is saying that it is verifiable. You can yourself experience it. Now what will we experience if we live according to the Bhagavad Gita? When we try to adopt the Bhagavad Gita as a manual for living, we will find that it is not that we will expect overnight miraculous changes in everything in life. But we will start finding that our inner perspective, our inner life, our inner confidence builds up. How is that? Because we will have a purpose for living. And we will see that we are moving along the purpose. Now the Bhagavad Gita, when it says that you can experience within, there are other literatures which build on the Bhagavad Gita, and they actually give an inner map in terms of, as we progress on the spiritual path, what are the changes that we will experience. Now I cannot go into all those technicalities, that is in the Madhurya Kadambani, but I'll just talk about two things here. The Bhagavatam says that when we live according to scripture, and now what does scripture tell us? Scripture essentially tells us that we are eternal spiritual beings. There is a supreme spiritual being, and the purpose of life is to relink in love with that supreme being. Now, when we do this, the Srimad Bhagavatam, which elaborates on the wisdom that is given in the Gita, it says that Bhakti Pareshanubhava Viraktir Anyatra Cha. It says that, firstly, it gives the example that just as when we are hungry and we eat food, at that time, nobody else needs to tell us, now you are satisfied. We ourselves, with every anughasam, with every morsel that we eat, we feel nourished, we feel strengthened, we feel our hunger mitigated, hunger removed. So similarly, bhakti, when we try to direct the love of our hearts towards Krishna by the practice of bhakti yoga, what happens? Para Isha Anubhav. Anubhav is experience. Para Isha. Isha is the controller, supreme Lord. Para is one who is beyond, who is transcendental. So we get experience of that Lord who cannot be experienced by ordinary means. He's transcendental. So it's not that I just come in front of the temple and stand in front of the deities, I will get experience of God. No, there has to be bhakti applied in the process. I prayerfully chant Krishna's names, prayerfully study scriptures, prayerfully worship the deities through bhakti. Then we experience God. And the result of this experience is Viraktir Anyatra Cha. Virakti is detachment. Anyatra is for other things. So, the experience of God is so fulfilling that we no longer crave for the hundreds and thousands and millions of experiences that the world is alluring us with. Eat this, watch this, touch this, buy this. The world is alluring us. That craving dies down. Just like the hunger example. Once we are full, we don't feel allured by this food, that food, because we are full. So like that, bhakti fills our heart with the experience of Krishna, and we are no longer tempted by the other things, no longer allured by other things. So, in one sense, Para Isha Anubhav is like the internal symptom, and Viraktir Anyatra Cha is like the external symptom. Now, many people may claim that, okay, I am devoted to God, I have seen God, or I love God. Now, we cannot know that. How will we know if somebody is doing really like that? So whether one is having experience of God or not, what we can see is Viraktir Anyatra Cha. If a person is detached from worldly passions, is not swept here and there by everything that the world is tempting with, then we can infer everybody needs happiness in life. If this person is not craving for the pleasures of the world, why is that? That must be because this person is experiencing something better. That's why the person is staying, by artificial force for the sake of show, a person may be able to stay away from worldly things for some time. But if it's going on consistently, that cannot go on artificially. So, the verifiability of the Bhagavad Gita's teachings is both in our own inner experience and our observation of others' experience. So when we come in a community of bhakti yogis and we observe, we'll see there are devotees who are practicing, and in many ways they are happier. They're happy. Now, this happiness is reflected not just in there being a big smile, but an overall contentness in life. When one does not crave for every single thing. And we will experience ourselves. If we start chanting Hare Krishna, if we start devoting ourselves to Krishna, we'll see that our worldly cravings will go down. And when the cravings go down, correspondingly, the anxieties also go down. Because the more we crave for things, then the more we worry whether I'll get them or I'll not get them. So this is the verifiability. And this is something which each of us can experience according to the level that we are practicing. And by that, as our conviction deepens, pratyaksha vagamam dharmyam, then we will see that the Bhagavad Gita offers us valuable guidance for living. Now, when we talk about the relevance of the Gita, we have to understand that yes, the Gita was spoken in a particular cultural context. But the Gita's essential message is universal. Its essential message goes far beyond the context of the Gita. Now, if you see, I'll talk about two ways in which the Gita's context stresses its message and how the Gita's message also transcends its context. So, what this means is, sometimes people think that if you have to practice spiritual life, devote yourself to God, then you have to renounce the whole world. You have to just become completely neglectful and you become basically good for nothing in the world. Now, there are sometimes people who use God as a hiding place. Then that means they want to run away from the problems of life and they use God as a place for running away. But the Bhagavad Gita itself reproaches this. In the 18th chapter, it talks about renunciation and talks there about renunciation in the mode of passion. And it says, Dukkhamityevyat karma kaya klesha bhayat tejit sakrutva rajasam tyagam naiva tyaga phalam labet. So in 18.7 it says that one who thinks, kaya sakrutva dukkhamityevyat karma, when I have to do my duty, there is so much trouble in it. Therefore, I will not do it. And kaya klesha bhayat tejit. Person doesn't want trouble for one's own body, one's own mind. And because of there is no interest in God per se. The only interest is in not having problems. If one runs away like that, Krishna says this is renunciation in the mode of passion. And naiva tyaga phalam labhet. This will not lead to any elevation in life. So, that is not recommended in the Gita at all. The Bhagavad Gita, what it states is, if we look at the context, it is spoken to a head of state, Arjuna. And he was actually about to renounce the world. The Bhagavad Gita guides him to do his duty. And it's spoken on a battlefield. The battlefield setting of the Bhagavad Gita conveys its supreme relevance. All of us are busy, but who can be busier than a warrior who's on a battlefield about to fight with an enemy? It's a most urgent situation. And the Bhagavad Gita, by being spoken in such a setting and by being heard by Arjuna in such a setting, shows that, it is so vital that even Arjuna, while being on a battlefield, he knew I had to fight, but he realized without knowing the purpose of life, I will not be able to fulfill the purpose of my fighting. And that's why he took time out to hear the message of the Gita. So, the Gita's context stresses the universality of its message. It is not just a message for people who want to renounce the world. It is for people who want to live in the world and engage in the world. And yet, some people feel very uncomfortable. Oh, how could God have asked someone to fight? Is the Bhagavad Gita really asking everyone to fight? Is it a violent book? But if we see in the Bhagavad Gita, yes, the setting starts from war. But after in the 4th chapter, Krishna gives in the 4.32, therefore arise at 4.42, Krishna gives a call, arise and fight. And after that, there are almost 400 verses. More than half of the Gita comes after that. In those 450 verses, there is practically no reference to fighting. The only one reference is in the 8th chapter, 8.7, Krishna says, always remember me and fight. So that the point is not fight. While doing your prescribed duty, remember me. That is the point of the verse. And then later on when Krishna is describing the Virat Rupa, at that time he shows Arjuna, therefore fight and you will attain victory. So, if you look at the message of the Bhagavad Gita, if it was just a call by one general telling a soldier, you fight, the message fight would have been then throughout. But the message of fighting disappears from the Bhagavad Gita practically after the 5th chapter. Because when Krishna and Arjuna start speaking, then nowadays teachers talk about, in education people talk about experiential learning. Instead of just telling students, get them to experience it, then they will learn better. Now Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita offers the ultimate experiential learning. What does he do? He transforms a battlefield into a classroom. He transforms a battlefield into a classroom. And there, by his presence and by his presentation, he lifts Arjuna far above the battlefield. And in their discussions of wisdom, they scale heights which have practically not been scaled before or after. And they provide for all time to come wisdom that is context independent, that is time independent. And that's why we will see that there are so many great saints throughout the Bhakti tradition, Ramanujacharya, Madhvacharya, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Vyasatirtha. None of these saints were warriors. Nor did they tell any of their followers to fight any wars. But they all appreciated and valued the Gita. So obviously, what they got inspiration from in the Gita is not its call for war. That is just a context, it's a setting. The essential message is not a call for war, but it is a call for love. It is a call for the human heart to unite in love with the divine heart. And that call is universal. Just as whether we live in ancient times or modern times or postmodern times, the sun is still needed to illumine the world. Similarly, whichever age we live in, whichever culture we live in, the heart still longs for love. And where to love, whom to love, by which our longing for love can attain lasting satisfaction, that is what the Bhagavad Gita reveals. And that's why its message is universal. And as we live that message, we will find greater and greater happiness flooding our heart. And our dependence on self-destructive, self-defeating sources of external pleasure. Habits that actually harm us, but because they give us pleasure, we often indulge in them. We'll become free from those. And the more we devote ourselves to God, the more we become independent of the world. Independent of the world means that the less we depend on the world for our satisfaction. And that brings greater security. Because the more we depend on the world and worldly things for satisfaction, the more we'll be in uncertainty. Because worldly things can be taken away at any time. But God, Krishna, is always there in our heart. And when we connect with Him in love, then we always have a source of satisfaction, of shelter, of joy within us, in our own hearts. And that brings the greatest fulfillment in life. So I'll summarize. I started by talking about how all of us need some guidance for living. So I discussed 4 primary sources. What are they? Tradition. We have always done it. But we discussed tradition is not reliable because sometimes there are superstitions that come down in tradition. Then second is culture. Everyone does it. But often the culture can mislead us because it may be manipulated by those with vested interest. Third is mood. It feels good. But then the point is that what feels good, that after some time feels bad. Same thing feels bad. And our moods are fickle. We can't rely on them. And last is logic. It makes sense. Now, the problem with logic is our logical faculty is limited, and the information based on which we make our logical decisions, that's also limited. So, all these are useful, but they cannot be our final authorities. Then we turn towards scripture. And in scripture, we focus on the principle that God has provided us the basic needs for living, and knowledge is also a need for living. So just as if a friend gifted us a complicated device, that friend would also give us some guidebook to tell us how to use that device. So God has given us this complicated body, which is very difficult to even understand and to maintain. Then will He not give us knowledge of what we are meant to do in life? And then when we look at scripture, how do we know that a particular book is scripture? It requires faith, but it is reasonable faith. Reasonable faith means it's sensible and verifiable. The Bhagavad Gita approach is not dogmatic, it's an invitation. It invites us to use our intelligence to evaluate whether its message makes sense, and then to use our own life to experience, to experiment whether what it promises us happens. What is this promise? That we are spiritual beings and we can find highest satisfaction in loving the supreme spiritual being. And through Bhakti Yoga, we can learn that love. And if we love this, the internal symptom is we will experience God. And that experience will be so enriching that externally we will become detached from outer, unreliable sources of pleasure. And lastly, we concluded with how when we practice bhakti, it is a matter of taking a step forward in reasonable faith, and that faith being vindicated in the testimony of our own heart. So thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Many people find that there is a public perception and a private perception in regards to religious organisations. For example, there is a private perception that is known to adherents in regards to behaviour, and and the way which is only known to adherents, and there is a public perception which an organisation or religion wants the public to be able to perceive it as.
If I understood you right, there is a public perception
Yes.
of religion or religious organizations that is negative.
That the religion wants to perceive, the public to perceive it as. For example, for the public, it is very good and everything is nice, and everybody is happy, and yet in the private perception, which is amongst adherents, seems to be a totally different one. Perhaps in regards to behaviour towards each other, or just privately, the perception is different than public, it seems that way. I'd just like your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, so the question is that often religious organizations want to convey a public perception that everyone who follows us is happy. But when we come close and have a private perception, people are suffering, and even people don't behave properly with each other, and there are many problems. So, what is your comment on this? There is an necessary tension always between practice and precept. There are certain things, certain values, which we aspire to live according to. But we have not come to those values till now. So, this tension is not undesirable. Because if we are aware, this is what I want to become, but this is where I am, then we'll feel inspired to rise upwards towards the standards that we want to live according to. So, but this difference between principle and between practice and principle becomes hypocritical if there is no attempt to come up to the principle. That means the principle is here, the practice is here, and without any attempt to rise up to the principle, one simply wants to garb and present without really practicing anything, without living according to principles, pretend as if one is living according to those principles. So this tendency towards duplicity is a universal human tendency. And religion is also a human activity. So this tendency will pop its head even in religion. Now, one response to seeing this distance between principle and practice is skepticism or even cynicism, where one rejects all religious people as having double standards, as hypocritical. That, if we have a limited experience of religion, that could be true. But even within religion, there are people who are sincerely aspiring to live according to the high principles that are being talked about. There will be a few people in any generation, saintly people who live according to selfless standards of love. There are always going to be very few. And there will be some more people who want to live according to those standards. And there may be many who are really not interested, they just want to have a religious garb. They just want to appear religious without really wanting to bring about any transformation in their lives. So now, the vibrancy or the fidelity of a religious organization will depend on who are its role models. That means, I'll give an example to illustrate this. Yes, in today's world, religious organizations often get a lot of bad press. Because people say that in religious organizations, there's politics and power structures and all those issues, and the spirit of religion is lost. It's possible that can happen, but to understand what essentially a religious organization is meant to be. Now, all of us have within us, a small or big, search for some higher thing in life. In some people it may be expressed more, in some people it may be expressed less. So we can envision this as a small drop of water, which is trickling down from a mountain and trying to go towards an ocean. Now, if there are, or not necessarily, it's a small trickle that is going down. Now, if one trickle of water is supposed to go down all the way from the mountain to the ocean, for it to reach the ocean is quite difficult. But if there are multiple small drops like that, or small trickles of water, small tributaries to rivers, then all of them, when they come together, it becomes a fast-flowing river. And then that river unitedly can move towards the ocean much more successfully than what would an individual trickle. So similarly, all of us have some inspiration, some urge. That is, those who want to be in religion, they have urge towards go towards God. But all of us are like small trickles or small river tributaries. But when such people who are inclined towards God, who want to move towards God, they come together and their individual contributions or individual desires, spiritual aspirations come together, then that becomes like a river. Now in a river, there is the flowing water and there is the river bed. The river bed is not the river. The river bed is simply the passage through which the water is flowing. So similarly, when people come together to facilitate by mutual cooperation, by synergy, their religious urges, their religious longings, their religious aspirations, then that becomes like an organization. So the organization is like the river bed. And the aspirations for God, the aspirations for pure principled living of the people in that organization, they are like the water that is flowing. Now sometimes when a river starts flowing with a lot of water in it, then some people may come and try to build a dam and use that water for their own purposes, rather than letting the water flow towards the ocean. So similarly, in religious organizations, people who are not interested in God may come. And they may start using the power, the position, the prestige, the resources for their own ulterior motives. And when that happens, then just like the river bed is still there, but the river no longer flows towards the ocean. So similarly, there means the form of the religious organization is there, but then people are no longer able to move towards God in that. So therefore, the success of a religious organization will depend on who are its models. Who is it aspiring to be like? So if there are great saintly people whom that organization holds as its models and tries to follow them, and there are going to be always people who will be with some non-spiritual motives, or even as I said, ulterior selfish motives. But if there is a constant awareness of why one has come to a spiritual organization, and people reorient themselves according to that reminder, then that organization can still help us move towards God. So that means, as you talked about initially, the difference between what is the public perception and what is the private perception. So the public perception, if it is not accompanied by private practice for purifying oneself, if it is not accompanied by diligent attempts to raise one's consciousness, to rise towards virtue, to rise towards selflessness, then that can become hypocritical. But if there is serious practice that is also recommended, and by that practice people do get transformed, then that distance which is there between principle and practice, that is not necessarily a sign of hypocrisy. It is a dynamic tension that inspires the practitioner to rise from the current level of practice to the principles that are held sacred. So, in the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, Srila Prabhupada, he organized a very vibrant program of spiritual practice. We regularly chant the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. We regularly study scripture. And this in and of itself it's no guarantee of purity. But when this is done sincerely, it periodically connects us with God. It reminds us of the purpose for which we are practicing spiritual life. And yes, like any human activity can be tainted by human defects. So yes, there will be human defects even in religious practitioners. And even in our movement, there are people with human defects. And those can color the perception of people who come to the organization and meet this kind of people. But ultimately, it is for us to decide what we are seeking. If we are seeking God, it is our responsibility is to sincerely seek for the higher truth, to seek for God. And if we have that sincere striving desire, then God will guide us to the right place. But if because of getting, say, some bad experiences, as you said, the distance between private and public perceptions, we become skeptical. And we give up on the search for God itself. Then we are left with no chance for ever succeeding in the spiritual quest. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that there are 3 pitfalls in the path towards God. Vitaraga bhaya krodha manmaya mamubashita bahavo jnana tapasa putamad bhavamagata. Says Vita means become free from 3 things. Raga is attachment. So if we think that this world itself is a very enjoyable place and all my desires for happiness will be fulfilled here, then we will not turn towards God at all. That is raga. Second, he says is bhaya. Bhaya is fear. I don't know what is out there. And how will I explore over there? So if one is not enterprising, one is not adventurous, then one will not try to expand the boundaries of one's consciousness. One will not explore new horizons. That is also, that lack of adventurousness can also be a pitfall. And third, is relevant to our discussion, Krishna says krodha. Krodha means anger. This anger refers to the frustration and the rage that comes when one gets bad experiences in one's spiritual quest and one feels there's no meaning to the spiritual quest only. Better not get into this business only. So that can also be an obstacle. So if we focus not so much on what faults are there in religious organizations, we focus on maintaining and strengthening our desire for spiritual illumination, our desire for enlightenment, our desire for God, then God will guide us towards a place where we can move onwards towards Him. And even within a religious organization, it's not that everybody is at the same level. Now, even within a religious organization, there are some people who are sincerely striving for God. If we follow them, we will move closer to Him. And even in the religious organization, there are people who have no interest in God. Their interest is only using God as a social cosmetic, for appearing good in the world's eyes. So, then such people, if we associate with, there will not be much benefit. So therefore, rather than focusing on the faults that we observe, yes, the faults are there, but we focus instead on our own pure spiritual aspiration and see how that spiritual aspiration can be fulfilled. And surely, God will guide us onwards in our journey. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So there's one question here. Okay, let's answer this. I'll take them. There's one question here. So, I was asked, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says at the end, Sarva dharman parityajya. Give up all varieties of religion and surrender to me. But then Krishna has come to teach dharma. So is it that when Krishna says that I should give up the dharma, is he referring that we should give up adharma and we should practice dharma? Or is he actually telling us to give up dharma itself entirely? Answer, the word dharma has multiple meanings. And we have to understand in context what it means. So certainly Krishna is not telling us to give up dharma and become sinful. Give up dharma and become adharmic. That is not the point of the Gita. But I will answer this question specifically in the Gita's context and then universally in how it applies to us. So Arjuna's starting dilemma was that two of his dharmas were conflicting. Which were his dharmas? He had a Kshatriya dharma, he was a warrior. And a warrior is meant to fight. So whoever comes against, if the warrior is supposed to defend the country, the warrior will have to fight. So Kshatriya dharma was to fight. But Arjuna also belonged to a dynasty. And he had a Kula dharma. In a dynasty, if we have our relatives, if they are in trouble, we want to help them. So he had his Kula dharma, which was to protect his relatives. So his question was, essential dilemma was, which is more important? Is my Kshatriya dharma as a warrior to fight important, or my Kula dharma to protect my relatives, which is important? And his problem was that if he gives up either dharma, there will be pap, there will be sin. If he doesn't just let his relatives die, he causes relatives' death. That is culpable. On the other hand, as a Kshatriya, if he doesn't fight, that is also culpable. So what to do? So Krishna says that yes, both these dharmas are important, but there is material dharma and there is spiritual dharma. All the material dharmas, or all material duties, are to be subordinated to and harmonized with our spiritual duty to God. So what Krishna is telling is, if we want to understand the import of the verse, we should not just focus on sarva dharman parityaj. His focus on mam ekam sharanam vraja. Prabhupada says that Srila Prabhupada says that when he went to America at that time, there was the age of the counterculture, there were the hippies at that time. So Prabhupada said the hippies had also practiced sarvadharman parityaj. They had given up their career, they had given up their families, they had given up their jobs, they didn't even have homes. They are literally sarvadharman parityaj, but they were not mam ekam sharanam vraja. So the thrust of the Gita's injunction is mam ekam sharanam vraja, become devoted to me. And for the sake of being devoted to me, if any dharma comes in the way, give up that dharma. So the Bhagavad Gita is not telling Arjuna that because you are a Kshatriya you have to fight and you don't care about your relatives. The Bhagavad Gita is telling that because it is the will of God that this war be fought, so that those who are vicious will be removed from power and those who are virtuous will be established in power. Therefore do the will of God. And in his specific context, his paradharma coincided with his Kshatriya dharma. So the Gita's message is not give up dharma, it is give up anything that will obstruct surrender to God. That will obstruct mam ekam sharanam vraja. So in Arjuna's case, if he feels that, giving up my Kula dharma will cause some sinful reaction, then Krishna assures, aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma shucha. I'll free you from sinful reactions. If Krishna's implication here was only to adharma, sarva adharman parityaja mam ekam sharanam vraja. There are some people who cannot understand the profundity of the Gita, and they have actually edited the Gita. And dharman, they have changed it, they have put a before that. Sarva adharman parityaja mam ekam sharanam vraja. So now, the problem with this rendition is, first of all, it does not appreciate the profundity of the Gita, but even in the context of that verse itself, if somebody gives up adharma, then as it is, that person is not going to get any papa. So why does Krishna have to say that, I will free you from sinful reactions? So the point is, when we give up dharma, we may be doing some sinful activity, we may get some sinful reactions. But what Krishna says is that, still, I will protect you from those sinful reactions. So the point of the verse is, don't let anything obstruct you in your surrender to God. If anything that even seems like religious, seems like duty, seems like morality, but if it obstructs you in the service of God, you should give it up. So that is the specific message of the Gita with respect to its context. And the universal message of that particular verse is that we all have, in a broad sense, the word dharma means, we all have our own conceptions of what I should be doing and what I should not be doing. So Krishna is telling us, if such conceptions come in the way of surrendering to me, then give up those conceptions and surrender to me. And with respect to, again, the question of religious organization, this is a very nice verse where Krishna says, the form is not important, the substance is important. There can be many different religious rituals. Sarva dharman parityajya. Krishna says, don't focus on the rituals alone. The purpose, the substance of all those religious rituals is surrender to me. So you focus on surrender to me and adopt those religious formularies, those forms which help you in surrendering to me. And those which do not help you, put them aside. So the essential message of the Gita is a call for paradharma, call for spiritual love for the Supreme Person, and to harmonize all other dharmas with the paradharma. That's why the word here is sarva dharman parityajya, where dharma refers to any activity, even if it seems religious, but if it obstructs us in the surrender to God, then we should give that up. Thank you. Yes, Mataji, you had a question?
I was just wondering, you mentioned in a few of your previous classes about how the mind has a tendency to fluctuate between extremes, rarely just fluctuating about. I was just wondering why that, and if you can elaborate a bit more.
Okay.
If you have time.
Yeah. So the question is, the mind has a tendency to fluctuate between extremes. Now, why is that? That is largely the effect of the mode of passion, Rajoguna. When we are affected by passion, we want to be the controllers. So the controllership can manifest in two ways, broadly speaking. I will be the enjoyer. So I'll catch this object, I'll subordinate this object, I'll enjoy this object. So for that, we need complete control on it. And the other, so to enjoy this world, we need control on the outer things. And this seeking control on the outer world is the path of karma. Karma marga, which is one of the paths in the Vedic path, that basically involves doing various religious rituals, maybe appeasing the gods, by which externals will become more and more favorable for our enjoyment. That is one phase of the mind. At one extreme it goes to, I want absolute control by which I'll be able to enjoy things. And then that same mind, when it finds that I'm not able to enjoy, I am frustrated in my attempts to enjoyment, then the mind thinks that, let me just renounce. And then if I can't get control over the world, the least I can do is I'll get control over myself. I'll get control over my senses, I'll get control over my mind, and I will be my own Lord. If I can't be the world's Lord, I'll be my own Lord. So that is the Jnana Marga. Jnana Marga, we try to completely detach ourselves from the world and try to establish ourselves as independent controllers of ourselves. Yes, we are meant to have self-control, but our self-control is meant to be in a mood of service to God. So the mind, when it is in Rajoguna, it goes to extremes like this. We are doing something. Suppose I want to discipline my life. If I want to fast, I will fast nirjal in such a way everyone will be impressed by my austerity. Everybody should know. Sometimes when we are fasting, the ego makes us see who is eating what. This person, no sense control. This person, no sense control. This person, no sense control. So our body is fasting, but our ego is feasting. So the mind goes to one extreme is, I want complete self-control. A total nirjal, I'll fast. And if I can't do that, then what is the use of control? Just enjoy. And the mind just dives into pleasure. So these are basically, this is just one example. In Rajoguna, the same controlling mentality manifests in two ways. One is I control and dazzle the world. I control the world and dominate the world for my enjoyment. Or I completely reject the world and then by my self-control I dazzle the world. So both are basically phases of the same Rajasic mentality of wanting to enjoy separate from God. But the more we come towards goodness, the more we understand that real happiness comes by connecting ourselves with God. So the mind's tendency towards going into extremes, that is largely the effect of the mode of passion. And as we become purified, that tendency to go towards extremes will decrease. But along with that, while that at a subconscious level will automatically happen as we come towards goodness. But at a conscious level also, we can strive to avoid the extremes. And Krishna says, as I said, yukta ahara viharasya, be regulated in all activities. So, regulation is a characteristic of goodness. You know, maybe a slightly humorous way of telling the three modes, how we function. Some people make things happen, some people watch things happen, some people wonder what happened. So, in ignorance, this happened, that happened, that happened. You know, what is happening? You just couldn't understand it only. Just things are just happening. So, in ignorance, we want control, but to get control over the world also requires some effort. So, when people don't want to put in that effort, what they do is, they go into an imaginary world. So, you know, especially nowadays, infatuation with television, movies and things like that. What is that? No, that is, the scriptures condemn eating, sleeping, mating, defending, an obsession with that. But when people are caught with television and movies, and this is not even eating, sleeping, mating, defending. It is second-hand eating, sleeping, mating, defending. Now somebody else is eating, sleeping, mating, defending, and we think, oh, if I were there, I would be enjoying so much. So a person is such a lazy person, that person can't even get out of bed. And that person shoots images on a video screen or game and thinks I'm a big hero. So this is Rajoguna, this is Tamoguna mentality, where one has no control at all. And one goes into a dream world to try to gain control. In Rajoguna, we try to get control by dominating things. But in Sattva-guna, there is moderation, by which we can connect with God. So both by gradual purification and by conscious introspection, we can look at our mind's tendency to go towards extremes and curb those tendencies. Does it answer your question? Thank you very much. Okay, yes.
We see in the Bhagavad Gita how Arjuna has a very deep relationship with Krishna. Can we all, individual souls, have such a deep relationship with Krishna, or is it just exclusive to some special souls?
Okay. So we see in the Bhagavad Gita that Arjuna has a deep relationship with Krishna. Can we all have such a deep relationship? Or is it something which is exclusive for Arjuna and some special souls? Every soul is meant to have an intimate relationship with Krishna. In fact, that is our very nature, our swabhava, or our swarupa rather. Our position is to have an intimate relationship of love with Krishna. At the same time, the intimacy will vary depending on different rasas. So in the spiritual world, different souls can be in different rasas. So the specific form of the relationship will vary. So there can be shantaras, where, for example, there are trees who are absorbed in thoughts of Krishna. There are grass who are just waiting with bated breath. When will Krishna put his lotus feet on us? There are Krishna's servants, Raktak Chitrak. They are longing to fan Krishna. And there are the topmost, there are the gopis, who are constantly in love with Krishna. Arjuna comes in middle in the Sakhyaras. There's a friend. So now, each of these relationships is intimate in its own way. So we may not have a specific relationship in Sakhya with Krishna. We may not have a relationship with Madhurya. What relationship we have, we don't know right now. But the important point is that whatever relationship we have, we will be satisfied in that relationship. Why is that? Because Krishna is not like a finite, limited person. Krishna is infinite, he's unlimited, and he can satisfy us in whatever relationship we may be in. So, the specific form of that relationship we can't have, but the complete fulfillment of heart that comes by a relationship with Krishna, that all of us can have. And in fact, that is the specific, that helping us progress towards that is the specific gift that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gives. Because he, through the process of chanting and through the process of Bhakti Yoga, as he's explained, he helps us move in a very close relationship with Krishna. And that's why, and Prabhupada also gave us that in one sense. Of course, he has given it, but in the practical sense, there are some of my friends, who are from traditional Vaishnava backgrounds. They say, how do you refer to Krishna without any honorific? No Lord Krishna, no Bhagwan Krishna, no Sri Krishna, just Krishna. Now, why is that? And in contrast, for Radha, you have Srimati and then you have Rani also. You have Srimati Radha Rani, such a respectful, double honorific for Radha, but no honorific for Krishna. Why is that? So actually, although Prabhupada taught us diligent practice of sadhana bhakti, but he also wanted us to have a personal relationship with Krishna. And we see that what an intimate relationship Prabhupada had if we study the songs that he composed on the ship, the Markine Bhagavata Dharma, and the other song where he talks about how I wonder today what was there in Krishna's lunch. So Prabhupada had an intimate relationship and he presented Krishna as an intimate friend to us. So yes, we all can have that relationship. And why Prabhupada had so much honorifics for Radharani is because there was a Sahajiya tradition which took the relationship of Krishna and Radharani very cheaply. And to emphasize that Radharani is not just like any ordinary girl, and Krishna's relationship with Radha is not just some ordinary mundane relationship, Prabhupada stressed the special position of Radha, and that's why he used both Srimati and Rani for that. But Prabhupada did want us to develop an intimate relationship with Krishna, and the process that he has given us can help us to develop that relationship. Did I answer your question? Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Nitai Gaur Premanande. Hare Krishna.